Hello, good people of the world. I've got something big for you today. And before you ask, no, it's not my waistline, which has gained the COVID-19, unfortunately, and needs to be reduced before we get back to normalcy. It's something powerful. In fact, it's so powerful and so big, I had to subject you to the poor lighting and bad audio of my workshop because that's the only place I can actually fit this big thing without potentially destroying a table. So I'm pretty excited about this unit, primarily for two reasons. First of all, I think it's really intelligently designed. If you've seen some of my other reviews, and I'll flash the magical cards up there somewhere, but I spend a lot of time talking about and thinking about, how's the product designed? Is it easy to use? Is it obvious how it functions? And kind of my litmus test for that I think through in my mind is, if I were away and power went out at our home for an extended period, would I be able to call my wife and explain to her how to quickly activate one of these units, get it out of wherever it's stored, and put it to use, keeping my family warm, to some degree safe, having the power for their devices and communications with the outside world. In this case, I think Ecoflow really nailed the design of this unit. Despite the fact that it's nearly 100 pounds, it's got some smart features on how you can carry it around, which we'll talk about when we do the walk around to the device. Everything from the manual to the packaging to their website is high quality, it's clear, it's been designed to communicate effectively and communicate well. So clearly they've invested some time into thinking through how do people use these things, what information are they going to need to use it well, what would they want to know from a pre-sales and marketing standpoint. So kudos to Ecoflow for really thinking through how to do a product well from a design and marketing perspective. The second thing that's really exciting to me is there's this emerging category of portable power bank type devices that could ultimately power an entire house. We've seen the stationary battery-based home power backup and things like the Tesla Powerwall, where essentially they're strapping a giant battery pack to the wall in your garage or outside your house and connecting it into your home's wiring. There's a product from Bluetti that has a similar idea of doing whole home power backup. What I think is particularly interesting about this Ecoflow Delta Max is, yes, this device sitting near me is a huge battery, 3,600 watt hours. You could actually talk about powering an entire home for several hours. But what's interesting is ultimately in their product roadmap, they have not only this unit, but they have a similarly sized and almost in the same format, pure battery unit that plugs into the back of this. They have what they call a smart generator, which again, very similar size and format and color scheme and all that stuff to this device, that runs on gasoline and plugs into this device. And they also have a panel that will interface to your home's electrical wiring. So you can kind of configure a custom solution. Maybe I need this guy plus 4 battery packs. Maybe you need this guy plus 2 battery packs. Maybe you want a gas generator backup built into your system, or maybe you don't. They also have a solar tracking device that theoretically you attach one of their panels to, and it'll track the sun and do all sorts of cool stuff. But you can essentially kind of build a customized Powerwall type device and yet still have some degree of portability. So if you wanted to take this guy camping, or if you had to move it for some reason, you could have that flexibility that you don't get with something like a Powerwall. And it also breaks up the expense, which I think is kind of interesting. With something like a Powerwall, you're making that large capital expenditure for the whole thing right out of the gate. Maybe there's some pros and some cons to that, depending on how you finance it and whatnot. With something like this, you could buy the Delta Max up front. You have a pretty strong power capability that's reasonably portable, and then you could add additional battery packs. You could add the interface to your home wiring. You could add solar, you could add whatever you want. So you could essentially kind of finance it that way by buying big components of the system over the course of its life. Now I'm recording this video. This is the only component of that system that's been released so far. At the end of the day, the rest of it is vaporware and kind of a promise. I did get some communication from Ecoflow that supposedly the rest of the components will be out by October of 2021. They're going to kind of release them as they become available. Delta Max is currently back ordered, I believe, when I checked most recently. So there are some issues getting supply of these devices, which seems to be the case with pretty much everything these days. So watch this space. If you are completely invested in using this as a foundation for a full home backup system, I would probably wait till all the key components are released and available, and maybe have kicked around the market for a little while. If you just need a really large, fairly good, mildly portable power bank today and that promise of future, full home battery backup is interesting to you, I think this is a pretty good unit to go with today. So let's do our typical walk around of this unit. What I was really excited about, right out the gate, there's a few things that struck me when I took it out of the box. Front panel is super well organized. It's very clean, it's very simple, it's clear and obvious what everything does. The display, I believe they took from some of their other units, but it kind of checks all the boxes that I usually look for. It's got your runtime remaining. In this case, it'll switch between days and hours. It will tell you the charge time remaining if you've got it plugged in and powered. You get your nice percentage display, obviously. You get a little bar graph with your battery remaining percentage, obviously. Tells you the current watts that you're outputting, current watts that you're inputting. So essentially all the key information you'd want. There's not a lot of superfluous info. There's not a lot of extraneous info. There isn't a multi-dimensional menu system. I really prefer the more simplistic and clear approach. Some people may prefer the detailed approach that a battery backup like the Bluetti uses, where there's a touch screen, you can go through multiple levels of menu, you can get extremely detailed information on the power you're using, draws of individual ports, all that sort of thing. For me, and kind of the way I would use this device and the way I'd want to use it in an emergency situation, I want my key info up front. The other thing I like is you've got all the ports you would need. There's not a lot of superfluous stuff, and the key ports are up front. We'll go into the side panel where there's some extra DC outputs, but the stuff you'd want is essentially right on the front panel. You've got 4 USB outputs. They're the standard plug. There's 2 regular USB-A ports, and there's 2 fast charge ports. So if you have something like an iPhone or Android phone built in the last 5 or 6 years that can draw a little more power than standard USB, you can use these blue ports over here, but having 4 ports is a nice number. You have 2 USB-C ports, which is a little bit unusual. They're both power delivery and they're both 100 watts, which again, in a lot of the other power banks, those max out at 60 and you generally get 1. The reason that's pretty exciting and I think useful to me is something like a MacBook or a lot of the newer Windows laptops, you can charge via USB-C. Having that 100 watt power delivery ability means you're gonna get enough juice to be able to charge the battery while you're doing intense work. Some of the 60 watt ones I've tried with I have a 13-inch MacBook Pro. It's one of the older ones that uses an Intel processor. And if the computer's turned off and I plug it into a 60 watt USB-C jack, it'll happily charge overnight. If I'm using the computer while having it plugged in, it kind of won't charge. It'll sort of keep the battery neutral. So if I plug it in at 50%, use the computer for a day and I'm doing relatively intense tasks, beyond just spreadsheets and web browsing, you'll see that battery kind of hover around 48 to 52%. With the 100 watt USB-C, it will charge up just as if I had it plugged in with a wall adapter. So I think that's a huge feature. AC outlets up front, you've got 4. Again, you have a 3600 watt inverter, so you shouldn't blow through any of these. I'll try the infamous breakfast test that I did with the Bluetti and blew out its over voltage protection. So we'll see if this guy is up to the task of breakfast. And you have this kind of interesting outlet up here. I initially thought this was a 30 amp, 240 volt outlet. It is 30 amps, but it's 120 volts. Apparently that's due to the US model of this unit. The European model, for whatever reason, can put out 240 volts. I would assume that's some nuance to the inverters or the way they phase electricity different over there. There's some sort of sciencey stuff that's a little bit beyond my knowledge level. I kind of got excited that, hey, maybe you could plug a dryer into here and be able to wash your clothes or something when power was out. Unfortunately, unless you have a 120 volt dryer, which I've never seen in the US, you're kind of out of luck. What I have heard is if you get 2 of these, you can get a special pigtail adapter and get 240 volts. That seems a little bit like a miss, but again, if you don't have a 240 volt application that you would need battery backup for, might not be that big a deal. The other big design thing on the front panel that's really cool that kind of threw me when I first took it out of the box is down here you have this little button. Pull this out, and it's this nice carry-on luggage style handle. And there's 2 large wheels on the bottom of this guy, so you can essentially roll it around like a rollaboard airplane suitcase. Now that sounds super awesome, and it is pretty awesome when you're on flat ground. Where it gets less awesome, and if you've ever tried to carry a wheeled carry-on up or downstairs, is that exact situation. So I'm out in my workshop right now. I just had like 3 or 4 stairs between here and where FedEx left this box, but it's still kind of a pain. the unit's 100 pounds. I wanted to take it down the stairs very gingerly. I didn't want to bang it around or anything like that. So you've got to be careful. I wouldn't want to take this up and down a complete set of stairs in my house on a regular basis. A, it's heavy. I'd be worried about goofing up the wood stairs. B, if something broke or snapped, you've got a pretty heavy thing bashing down the stairs. You're potentially jostling this unit around quite a bit. So my hope was that it'd be easy enough that, if you were in an emergency situation, you could have this guy downstairs, maybe in your office during the day, and then wheel him upstairs to your bedroom at night to power an electric blanket or something like that. I don't think that's really a viable scenario. Theoretically, in a longer term power outage, you'd want to keep everything in one part of your house anyway. So maybe that's one more vote on that front, but I wouldn't buy this carry handle assuming you could move it up and down stairs. I would be a little worried about something like an RV where you have those kind of folding metal stairs taking this in and out, so I might use the carry handle for that. In terms of the kind of physical overall format of the device, it kind of is similar to the Bluetti in that it's this sort of big cooler format with two handles on each side. They give you these little pads that go over the handles, which is kind of nice. That was particularly helpful taking out of the box. Again, it's 100 pounds, which, depending on your physique may or may not sound like a lot, but in reality, and again, at least for me as an average, or I would hope above average adult male, I couldn't do this myself. I had to have my wife help me take it out of the box, just since you're really bending down trying to get in there. I was able to hoist it up on this workbench myself, but it's not something that I want to move around a lot. I would want to carry any kind of long distance. It's, I would say luggable is probably the best description I would offer. And despite some of their marketing materials showing this guy out in the tent and out in an RV type environment, I don't know if this would be my first choice for camping. You would need a pretty specific scenario where either you were powering a lot of devices and needed that full 3,600 watt hours of power in your campsite, or base camp setup where you were taking it out, leaving it in one place, and that was kind of your key power system for your base camp. Now, moving around to the different sides of the unit, I'm not going to turn it to this side, which as you're facing it is the left side, just because it's difficult to move around. There's really nothing of note on that side other than the branding. There are two large fans on the top. It seems like one side is an intake, one side's an output. It does look like they put some foam filters in there. When I've run the unit with some standard devices plugged in, the fans will kick on. They are variable fans, so the more draw you have coming out of the unit, the more noise you get from the fans, but it's not an unpleasant noise. It doesn't particularly howl or generate a lot of fan noise. Similarly, when you plug it in, there's one power cord. There's no external inverter or anything like that, but the fans will spin up while it's charging. They will turn off when the charge is complete, which is nice. The one thing that's a little bit frustrating is the device will kind of do a top-off charge at random intervals. So I had it in my office for a couple or 3 days and just left it plugged in. At random points, the fans would spin up. I assume it had dropped below, whatever percentage charge it was set to. If you were concentrating or weren't expecting it, those fans spinning up might bother you. If you had this wherever you were sleeping, that might bother you a little bit. So just something to be aware of. Moving to the right side of the unit, again, you've got the Ecoflow branding. I think it's nicely done. You can see the wheel over here. It's pretty large. Seems like a fairly decent wheel, although not something I would necessarily trust to go off-road at a campsite or in an outdoor environment where I was towing it over a long distance. You've got these two nice little panels over here that kind of cover up the additional ports. There is a door on here. For some reason, my door won't fully latch. Ecoflow told me that this is a prototype unit. There's a little wrench that you maybe were able to see on the display that apparently indicates it's a prototype unit. So hopefully these doors, or this door in particular, will be fixed in the end version. A couple nice things to point out here. They do have this little rubber grommet on this door that you can pop open. So if you had some stuff plugged in here, theoretically you could close that door up and hide it and not have this door sort of flapping in the breeze. Now this door I would call kind of your esoteric DC output door, for lack of a better phrase. You do have the mix of AC and DC up front. The AC side is traditional wall plugs. The DC side is your USB and USB-C. Back here you've got a 12 volt 30 amp Anderson power pole output. Love Anderson power poles, they're great. I'm sure you can Google those if you don't know what they are. You can get some knockoff tools that make it fairly easy to assemble your own plugs. So You could hook this up to a battery charger. You could hook it up to something that needed 12 volts that you want a fairly simple connector for. The other thing I love about Anderson is they pull out with a relatively moderate amount of force, so if somebody tripped over it, it would hopefully yank it out of the device rather than damaging your cord or damaging the device itself. Next up, you got your traditional cigarette lighter / car adapter, your regular 12 volt adapter you plug into your car. I would use this for something like a portable refrigerator or whatnot. You could use it to add more USB outlets or whatever kind of 12 volt device you needed. You've also got these 12 volt 3 amp cords. I'll put in the description the specs for the connector. I'm not sure what it is off the top of my head, but it seems like it's kind of a way to get a generic round 12 volt output and a way that you could build some simple adapters. The application that jumped to my mind was I have some amateur radios that use a wall wart with a little circular 12 volt plug. I could build some adapters so I'm not having to use an AC outlet on the front to charge my radios. You could use this for laptops that have kind of the old-fashioned power brick and output 12 volts. Obviously, you'll need to source the right plug you need for your laptop. You'll need to source a plug on this side and make sure you've got the thing wired correctly so you don't blow out your devices. To me, that's a pretty neat and nice touch. Some way that you could kind of power your one-off, strange 12 volt devices and have a good setup for disaster preparedness. There's an on-off switch for this guy over here, and the rest of this stuff, there's this IoT reset button. I would think of this as essentially Wi-Fi on-off. I don't know why they call it IoT, I guess because you can get more funding from venture capitalists if you talk about IoT, which is the Internet of Things, for those that aren't aware, instead of just calling it Wi-Fi on-off. But basically you press this button, a little Wi-Fi icon will flash on the front of the device and you can pair it to the phone app, or you can theoretically set it up to access your own Wi-Fi. I haven't gotten that piece to work. I don't know if it's my Wi-Fi network, I don't know what it is, but I can communicate with the device, so it operates in what I think they call a remote mode, where essentially your phone connects to a Wi-Fi network that's broadcast by the Delta Max, by the Delta Pro, versus you can also have it operate in, I think, what they call infrastructure mode, where the Delta Pro is actually connecting to your Wi-Fi, and then your phone is communicating with it over your Wi-Fi network. That second piece is the one I haven't been able to get working. The other stuff on here, you've got this pairing button. I have no idea what that does. It's not covered in the manual. They do mention on the specs that this unit has Bluetooth built in, but there doesn't seem to be any obvious way to do anything with the Bluetooth. That may be for connecting it to the smart generator or some of those other devices. I'm not sure. There's also this remote outlet that looks like it's a Ethernet cable type outlet. Again, not sure what that does. Doesn't seem to have any of the typical network lights that you'd expect, so I don't think it's an Ethernet port. I have not plugged it into my Ethernet network because I don't know what the heck comes out of there and don't want to damage my networking equipment. And then you've got this remote standby on-off switch. What I believe this does is with the smart generator, you can set it so that it'll only spin up when your battery pack gets low, which is kind of a neat idea. So all your devices will draw electricity from the battery pack, and then the pack will send a signal to the generator and say, hey, fire up, run full bore and charge me, and then turn off. So instead of having the generator kind of go on and off on a random basis, it'll turn on, run for a defined period, charge this guy up and shut off. And I believe there's some ability to do some scheduling for that. So like if you were at a campsite where they had certain hours where you could run your generator, you could set that up so your generator would turn on, power this guy up, and then you could run your RV or your campsite off of this guy for a defined period of time. So that's kind of the all things DC panel, for lack of a better phrase. Down here is another interesting panel. This, as far as I know, is a proprietary connector. They call it Infinity AC. The interesting thing about this is they do make an adapter. I'm not sure, I don't think it's available yet, but it's on their roadmap, where you can plug a J1772 EV charger into this guy. The EV purists are probably rolling their eyes saying it's not a charger, it's an EVSE, which stands for Electric Vehicle Service Equipment. To make a long story short, despite all that nuance, if you have an electric vehicle charger with a little handle with kind of that goofy rounded triangle plug, you can get an adapter that will go on there and then plug into this Infinity AC port. The reason that's interesting is you can drive, I believe it's I think it's 3.6 kilowatts into this guy to charge it. So you can charge significantly faster than you could plugging this into your typical household outlet. I think that would be interesting for a couple reasons. if you had something like this in the back of your truck, or maybe in the back of your Tesla or other electric vehicle, you stop to fast charge your vehicle, you could also plug this guy in, get a full load of juice, go out and use it as at a job site, have it power your tools. If you were building a remote cabin, you could have it run that without using a fossil fuel-based generator if that was important to you, and get that fast charge in roughly the same amount of time or less as it would take to top up your vehicle. The other interesting application I think that you would have for this is if you were in a scenario like the Texas power outage that happened in earlier 2021, where they were kind of turning power on and off at defined periods so people would have some time to charge things. Having the ability to pump a fast charge and pump a lot of watts into this guy in a short amount of time would be really nice. If the power company said, hey, we're doing rolling brownouts for whatever reason, you're going to get an hour of power at this period, you could probably top this guy up to near full from near empty in that hour using that electric car charger. So pretty cool feature, not something I think I've seen on any of these other devices, and potentially something that we'll see more of in the future. Moving to the back of the unit, and again, I spared you my huffing and puffing and potentially pulling a muscle, wrangling this thing around so you can actually see the back of it. Better view of our wheels, you can kind of see the size, you can see the clearance you have in there, which seems to me to be a little over an inch, which again kind of speaks to you probably don't want to take this thing off-roading. There are some nice rubber pads that you may be able to see under here, so the thing's resting on your floor and kind of a cushion versus resting on the wheels, which may be a little bit janky due to rolling over some grid or some road stuff. So hopefully keeping your floors a little nice, which again is just kind of shows, I think, the level of thought that went into how they designed this thing, that somebody clearly paid attention to how they thought people would use this device and did some thoughtful touches to figure that out. So back, you've got some vent holes, you've got your handle. Again, I left my little pads on there just because they're kind of nice, I guess. Got 3 magical doors back here. The first 2 I'll go into are these 2 bottom ones, since they're probably easiest to explain. Extra battery port number 1 and extra battery port number 2. These do look like proprietary connectors, but you can daisy chain several batteries that are, again, upcoming, that are similar size and shape, and hook these up and kind of expand that 3.6 kilowatt hours with additional capacity. There is a limit to the number of batteries you can hook up. I'll flash up the documentation from Ecoflow that kind of shows that. One thing I don't know is if you could stack these, so you could kind of have this in a corner of your garage or a corner of your home and have 3 or 4 of these puppies stacked up. Obviously, I wouldn't want to have like 5 of them on a higher floor in my house, just since there'd be a lot of load on the floor, but it would be nice if you could kind of stack them and save some space that way, since there's really nothing on the top of this unit, and it does appear to be designed with a flat surface and that ability to stack. I'm just not sure if that's actually possible. Now, going behind this door, which I'll call the input door, theoretically that proprietary Infinity AC connector up front is also an input into the device, but your more traditional kind of classic inputs are back here. Things I like, they tell you what everything is on the door out here, so you kind of know before you go flipping open doors. The door looks nice. They've got some yellow around here kind of telling you, hey, this is where you plug stuff in. They've got a circuit breaker back here so you can reset things if you tripped one of the breakers in the unit. The other thing that's pretty interesting here is they've got a classic non-proprietary computer connector. Again, a great thing if you lose the cord, you're not totally up the creek until you order a special cord. But they also have this fast and slow / custom switch. So you can set the draw that the unit pulls out of the wall, both kind of to 2 arbitrary levels with this switch. You can also customize that a little further in the app, and we'll talk about the app in a couple minutes. But you can set it so you're drawing a smaller amount of current, which is what I currently have it set at. Unless you had a need to charge quickly, I would leave it there. It puts a little bit of stress on your home's wiring. If you're drawing too high a current, generates heat, could cause problems if your wiring's undersized or something like that. In the best case, kind of trip your breaker. You also have your input here, which is I believe it's a standard plug. I'm not sure what this plug is called, but I have seen on other devices, but they supply you with a 12-volt car adapter cord, so you can plug this into your vehicle. You can adjust the amount of draw from the 12-volt outlet, so depending on how robust your car's electrical system is, you can make sure it doesn't cause any problems there, blow any fuses in your vehicle. This is also where you plug in solar input, and I believe this can take a pretty significant amount of solar input. I'll put that on the screen once I do my research and figure out exactly what that is. They do supply you with a solar input cord that ends in standard MC4 connectors. hooray to Ecoflow for using standard connectors, and I'm wagging my fist in frustration at Jackery, particularly on their new 1500 and 2000 for having a proprietary connector that at this point seems a little bit difficult to source. There's nothing too exciting on the top and bottom of the unit. On the top of the unit, there is this giant sticker that tells you that the plastic is a little bit blotchy due to them using some kind of fancy green manufacturing process. I think it looks kind of cool. That's almost a marbled effect. It wouldn't have bothered me, but I'm sure it might bother some people, which is why they put that sticker on there. Nothing too exciting on the bottom of the unit other than those nice little rubber pads, which I think is a smart idea for making this a little kinder to your floors, making it a little nicer to set down when you're done rolling. And just overall build quality of this thing, it's super robust. It's, maybe a little boring color-wise. It's kind of got this gray and black look, but it's well organized. It's clearly thoughtful. A good portion of what I do professionally is around how do you make products usable, how do you make them approachable, how do you kind of figure out how people actually use it in the real world versus, how do you think they're going to use it and then just take a wild guess. Clearly somebody either was exceptionally good at understanding how people might use this, or they've built several prototypes and kind of watched how people have used it. Just simple things like giving you some pads for the handles is a great idea. The way they labeled everything really did an excellent job, I think, on the design of this. So before we go into a little bit on the app that's associated with this device and also works for some of Ecoflow's other devices, who do I think is this thing for and who would actually buy this? Because it is not an inexpensive unit. Obviously, as you go up in capacity, you're going up in price. This unit, I'll put the current retail price on the screen just so I can make sure, number one, it's accurate, number two, that it's current. But it's more expensive than some of the other units that I've reviewed. And like the other units that I've reviewed, it was provided by the manufacturer. My positivity around the design, how this thing is laid out is, it's just kind of my natural instinct, especially based on having spent some time with people that are experts in product design. And they really did do a nice job on this. But thinking about it, it's not something that I would want to take camping. It's just simply too big to lift up, put in the car. It's heavy, 100-pound weight is quite a bit. It is, I think, a good format. I think this kind of boxy design is decent for storage, for putting it somewhere. Handles stick out a little bit in the front, so it's not 100% space efficient, but I think that makes it a little easier to carry than kind of tucking the handles in. I would look at this as kind of a long-term home power backup solution. We've talked in the past in some of my other reviews about why you might consider a battery bank or solar generator, whatever you want to call it, instead of a gasoline generator. I would look at this as kind of the pinnacle of semi-portable battery backup devices. You could wheel this to different rooms in your house. If you had a situation where somebody down the street needed help, you could wheel it down there. If you had this stored in a basement or had it stored, somewhere in your house and the power went out for an extended period, you could relatively easily get it to where you needed it. Again, I wouldn't want to be taking this thing up and down the stairs 2 or 3 times a day, but I wouldn't mind taking it down the stairs once over a multi-day power outage. That kind of home emergency backup type usage scenario, I think, is also further supported by the way this thing is designed. I'm arguably the kind of power backup expert in my family. This device, out of everything I've reviewed so far, even the Jackery, which was kind of the winner of straightforward interface, this is the easiest to use. You go on here, there's one button that's a different color. It's pretty obvious how you turn it on. You see the display, you've got your key information there. It's obvious where the USB plugs are. And if you want to turn the AC power on, again, super obvious. You hit the button, it's on. There's no goofy menus, there's no booting up, there's no individual switches for each section of power. And I kind of like that they hide some of the more esoteric inputs. It just makes the thing a little less intimidating, makes it a little easier to use, makes it a little more obvious for somebody that's in a situation where the power's out and you're not around. If you're kind of the key backup person in your family, makes it a little bit less stressful, which I think is nice. And I like that it kind of serves as a base to more of a whole house power backup type of system. Assuming that Ecoflow gets the rest of the components out, and this is not their first product, based on the kind of caliber and nature of their marketing. And yes, you can just throw money at marketing and make things look good, even if you're 2 guys, a tumbleweed and a dog sitting in a shanty somewhere. But it seems like they're a going concern. They seem like they're a company that's thoughtful and is approaching things the right way. So I don't have any doubts that they'll get the rest of the components out. They are saying October, so that's 2 months away, so not a lot of time to wait. I like that this could serve as kind of your long-term backup power solution today, and then expand into a whole house backup system tomorrow. You could get crazy with generators, additional power packs, connected to your home wiring. You could have tracking solar panels, all sorts of cool stuff. But I like that you can customize it. You can buy what you need today. You can expand it as you go. Theoretically, you could upgrade components. Maybe if they came out with a battery pack with some new technology that had a little more capacity, you could just replace one pack instead of if you had a Powerwall type of system where you're replacing essentially the entire thing. Now on the van life / RV life / overlanding / whatever you want to call it type of front, they had the obligatory picture in their marketing materials of some cute hipster millennial couple in a RV with one of these puppies. I don't see it as relevant in that situation unless you built it into a custom van or built this into an RV or left it kind of in a storage area of your RV and essentially used it as a generator. I don't know enough about the nuances of RV electrical to know if not having the 240 volt output is a handicap or if that's kind of a non-issue. There is that 30 amp DC connector similar to what Bluetti uses with their aviation plug. So assuming that you needed a lot of DC power in your RV, you're covered there. You're only having 4 AC outlets, I would assume might be a problem in an RV type environment, particularly when you look at Bluetti with their 6 outlets, although the lower powered inverter, which I did manage to trip with a hot plate and coffee maker. Maybe you could use this 30 amp outlet to power an additional inverter, get yourself some more outlets. But this is not something I would want to schlep up and down some stairs on an RV that are folding and maybe a little bit flimsy. I'm already pushing over 200 pounds, throwing another 100 bills at me, and adding something heavy and awkward, maybe not the best idea, and maybe not something I want to have to move in and out of a vehicle on a regular occurrence. So if you kind of build this in, maybe put a panel around it, maybe have this in one of the under storage compartments in your RV. Maybe this kind of ups the game for boondocking. Maybe it's also kind of a portable or semi-portable home backup situation. So essentially I'd look at it as someone that doesn't need ultimate portability. If you want something primarily for car camping, I would absolutely go with a Jackery, 1000. If you want something just to kind of keep your cell phones running, either when you're camping or at home, go with one of the myriad 500 watt-hour devices. If you want something that's more back at my home office, give me 4 or 5 days of charge phones, laptops, run some household devices, that sort of thing. Something in the 2000 watt range or watt-hour range is probably where you want to be. Bluetti, I think, is a pretty compelling option there. I'll put my link to that review up. But if you want something that gives you long-term, serves as a foundation for a whole house backup, great design, easy to use, has that app connectivity is expandable, I don't think there's any other place you can get that. So you're going to pay a high price of admission, but if that's kind of your mission requirements and it's that specific, I don't think you can go wrong with something like the Ecoflow Delta Max. So let's talk apps. And I've got to admit, I was a little skeptical when I read that the Delta Pro came with an app, 5-10 years ago in the product design space. Everyone was all into apps. Every device had to have an app. Now it's kind of the opposite. People will roll their eyes when they hear, oh, this device has an app. I was kind of coming to it a little bit from that perspective, but I've got to say I was actually fairly impressed with the app. And there's 2 modes that this can operate in. There's, for lack of a better phrase, what I'll call an infrastructure mode, where it connects to your Wi-Fi access point and theoretically is able to communicate with Ecoflow's servers, do firmware upgrades, all that sort of thing. I say theoretically because I haven't been able to get it to connect to my network. I've tried creating alternate Wi-Fi networks, I've tried all sorts of things, haven't been able to get it to work, so not sure if that's by virtue of the fact that I have a prototype unit or by virtue of the fact that for whatever reason it doesn't like my network. Putting infrastructure mode aside, there's also what I would call, let's call it the direct connect mode, where the Ecoflow will broadcast its own Wi-Fi network. You can connect to it via your phone and then open up the Ecoflow app and you'll see your device in there. So I'm going to go ahead and press that oddly named IoT reset button on the side, and I'll hold it down until I hear a little beep, and we should see a blinking Wi-Fi logo up on the screen, which we do. And then I will go and start screen recording on my phone. Now the key to the app portion of this review is not hating on the lobster shorts. You gotta rock the lobster shorts every now and then, especially when you're hanging out with your little buddy. So right now I'm currently connected to my local Wi-Fi network. So the first step in this process is to go to your settings and connect to the network that's being broadcast by the device. So the first step in connecting to the device is connecting to the Wi-Fi network that's being broadcast. So I'm going to scoot over to my settings, and you'll see I've got this Ecoflow network that the device is putting out. I'm going to connect to that. I frankly can't remember what the password was, although it says in here it's an unsecured network, so presumably there is no password, so that should make life a little easier. And then I can go back to the Ecoflow app. And when I open that up, I'm actually going to see the device listed here. So I've got my Ecoflow test. If I was in infrastructure mode, if I wasn't connected to an Ecoflow device, I would have the ability to create an account and add a new device to that account. That's the piece I haven't been able to get to work. But when I open up this Ecoflow device, you can see a few pretty cool things in here. First of all, you get a little bit more detailed insight into how much power you have left. On the display screen, you can see it says 7 days. When I go in the app, it takes me down to an additional level of detail. I've actually got 7 days and 12 hours remaining. You can see my input and output. You can see a little bit of history in there. And let's turn on the inverter and we'll see hopefully some of those numbers jump. So you can see the runtime decreases. It doesn't look like it's actually drawing anything, so we don't see any of those graphs move. But what's interesting here is you've also got down below the ability to turn inputs on and off. So I can turn my DC on. You'll see now I've got a 1 watt draw on the DC side of the system. And you can see the wattage draw of each individual port, right down to the individual USB port level, which is kind of cool. If you had, I think in particular, something like a laptop plugged into there, you could see how much power was being drawn. You could decide if, maybe you had a couple of high-end MacBooks or high-end laptops, you could see that they were drawing a significant amount of energy. Maybe you want to ramp that down. So we've got a good amount of information here, and a lot of this, this is information that you don't get on something like the Jackery. It's information that you can get on something like the Bluetti, although you have to go through those touchscreen menus. So I kind of like that the physical unit itself, it's kind of basic mode, and then if you want what, for lack of a better phrase, I'll call pro mode, you can go into that app and see all these details. You also get quite a few settings in here, so you can see I can change the name, that may or may not be interesting to you. Where things do get a little interesting is you can set the charge and discharge level. So I can kind of play that Tesla game where I can cap my maximum charge at 75%. I don't know if that saves the batteries or just makes me feel better, but I've set it to 75. I can set my minimum to 5%, so you can avoid drawing the battery down too much. I would assume that, like any one of these devices, they put some battery protection circuitry in there, so you won't ruin it if you take it to 0. There's probably still some capacity left, but if it makes you feel good, then you can adjust those levels, which is kind of nice. You can set that AC charge speed, which we discussed when looking at the ports on the back, and you can see I've got 100 watt increments, so I get a fair amount of customization there, and that's kind of nice. Similar thing on the car input. You can set it between 4, 6, and 8 amps, so you can make sure you're being kind to your car wiring if you're going to charge via the 12 volt outlet. Turn your beeps on and off, the screen brightness. This smart generator feature, theoretically, and the help does show up. So that's that piece we talked about earlier where it will actually turn on the generator when the battery gets below 20%, kind of run it until it charges you up to 80%. Presumably that's a little more efficient, and it would kind of have a block of generator noise rather than having your generator kicking on and off quite a bit during the day, which is a pretty smart addition. There's some timeouts we can set in here. I always complain in some of my other reviews about the screens timing out too quickly or not quickly enough. You can set it in here. Again, that's probably useful primarily if you're doing a YouTube video, although it would be useful if you had this unit in your bedroom at night and you're trying to get some sleep, or maybe you're on a camp out. You could set the timeout to go down quite a bit, or you can set it to never, so it's that device is always on and you always see this display up front. Other than that, I think there's just the right amount of settings in here. You can see we've got some specs, which gives us a little bit of kind of raw information. It tells us the maximum outputs and all that. So if you need to get a little close to your max output, it's kind of nice that you can go in the app and look that up and not have to go on the website and try and find those specs. Particularly if your power was out and your internet was down or something, you could get all that right within this app, which should still work even if you don't have a real internet connection, since, again, in this case, my phone is communicating directly with the Wi-Fi in this device. Now, I've seen some screenshots on Ecoflow's website where you can access the other devices in the ecosystem. They show you can access the smart panel, you can see usage. Presumably, if you have multiple batteries connected, you could see all the information from there. There is this pairing facility in here that presumably would integrate everything under the app, which looks super cool. I don't have all those other devices to test with, so can't really see that at this point, but if everything's as well put together as this initial app, I think that would give you a pretty comprehensive setup. And if you're wondering why there's the two different modes, the infrastructure versus the direct connect mode, I think the use case for the infrastructure mode is firmware updates, that sort of thing is kind of obvious. Or if you have this set up as kind of your build your own Tesla Powerwall, where this device is sitting in your garage, maybe you're upstairs, or maybe even you have a remote cabin where you have one of these set up with other components, you would be able to access it, assuming you configured your network properly, from anywhere in the world by virtue of having this connected to your Wi-Fi infrastructure, which is kind of cool. You could fire this up if it was a remote cabin. You could see your power usage if you were somewhere far away, or you were in another part of your house where the Wi-Fi from this unit wouldn't quite get there. So how about the standalone mode? Why would you want to use that? So a couple scenarios I can think of there. Number one, you've got an extended power outage, you've lost your Wi-Fi in your home or wherever you are, so you're not going to have that infrastructure to connect to. Second thing I can think of that would be fairly useful is if maybe you had this at a campsite where obviously there's not going to be Wi-Fi infrastructure, or you had it at a tailgate or something like that, and this device was in the back of your truck or in the back of your RV. You couldn't necessarily see the screens, but you had it plugged into all your stuff and you wanted to see how much runtime you had left, see what devices were using the most power, that sort of thing. So it gives you a nice way to kind of access all the data, all the power output usage data, capacity and everything without having physical access to the device, which is kind of neat. The app's free in the App Store, so no additional cost there. Just that setup thing that I can't quite seem to get to work is a little bit frustrating, and I've reached out to Ecoflow and asked if they have any thoughts or suggestions on how I can get that working. But presumably, if you don't have a prototype unit, or if your Wi-Fi is a little less grouchy than mine is, you won't have those issues. So I can't say when I took this unit out of the box, I said, boy, I hope this has an app with it. But having used it, having played with it a little bit, it's actually quite useful, and I could see some scenarios where it would be helpful, both in day-to-day use and also in an emergency type situation. If you want something that can power your home for a long time in a disaster, can expand and potentially power your entire house, and also integrate with fossil fuel and solar, where you almost have an indefinite off-grid backup solution, or even could use that as a foundation for an off-grid cabin, there's really not anything in the market that does all those things and does them with the design, relatively nice and maturing app, and just the panache, for lack of a better word, of this Ecoflow unit. Absolutely high price of admission. Have a good think about it. Happy to answer questions in the comments, but if those are your requirements, I don't see any other companies at this point that are doing anything that's close to this. Again, with that caveat that right now, the entire system is a PowerPoint slide, but we should see in the next 60 to 90 days, the rest of those components come out and see how that overall system functions. You have enough data points that if that's your need, you can decide if this is the right approach for you. Ever wonder why every talking head on YouTube asks you to hit the like and subscribe button at the end of their video? You were right, because we're living in a computer simulation. And our benevolent robotic overlords get just a little bit of energy every time you hit that like. So do me, the rest of civilization, and our benevolent robotic overlords a favor. Mash that subscribe, be kind to each other, keep living your simulated dreams.